What's your scariest camping experience? Story 1. Went camping in deep Appalachia in a tent. Woke up to a weird feeling that I was lying on something. Then I felt it move. A snake had made its way under my tent, and I think it was trying to get warm as it stopped moving right under where my back was. After moving a bit, it finally went on its merry way. I'll never forget how it felt moving underneath me. Not scary, but in a tiny Forest Service cabin in Montana, we were in bunk beds. My friend said, "Is your mattress moving?" I said, "Yes." Our mattresses were full of mice, but we didn't know it until we went to bed late in the dark and lay in our bunk beds. ETA, I am pretty sure it was Trail Creek Cabin, a 1.9-mile hike to it south of Livingston, just outside of Yellowstone. You can still rent it. Now it's $55 a night. Pics of the bunk beds online. I wonder if they are the same mattresses from 1995 when I was there. Reminds me of when I went camping as a kid one time. We all felt stuff moving all night under us, and I was freaked out because I thought it was bugs or roaches or something, and was not about that. Anyway, we got up in the morning and took the tent down, which was huge by the way, only to see about 50 to 60 toads all half buried in the dirt under the tent. No clue WTF was going on. They weren't there when we set it up. There was no indication anything was amiss either. But there they were, all balled up just chilling there, pissed that we uncovered them. Story 2. I was camping once in the UP in Michigan, in a pretty secluded spot with distinct individual campsites. It was in the fall, so dead leaves were all over the ground. When we were settling to sleep, we started to hear these slow, consistent footsteps on the leaves. They'd walk around the campsite, circle our tent, and just walk all around without any clear goal and without stopping. Obviously, we assumed it was some kind of animal, but when we rushed out with a light, there was nothing. I mean, no sound, no trace of anything. Once we were back in the tent, these footsteps immediately started up again, and they didn't come from far away. They started up right next to our tent. We repeated this whole rigmarole probably 3 more times because of how distinct and close and creepy those footsteps were, and we never caught even a glimpse of what was walking around. The next morning, we were sitting by the fire and started hearing the steps again, only to look down and realize it was the sound of multiple small frogs hopping around the campsite. I went solo camping a few years back. I flew out a few days after I had been in a stalking incident, so I was already on edge, but this trip was already booked and paid for. I set up my tent, and it was still light out, but I was just hanging out inside and kept hearing something walk around my tent. I popped my head out and saw nothing, but when I went back in, I heard the footsteps creeping around again, so I'm low-key freaking out and thinking I made a big mistake, or the guy somehow followed me to this island and was going to murder me. It was a chicken. A similar thing happened to me. My room is ground level, and I was lying in bed one night with the window open to cool down the room. Then out of the blue, I heard what I thought at the time were very human-sounding footsteps in the grass and leaves outside my room. I freaked the hell out and was too scared to investigate, and too scared to call the police in case it was something dumb, so I slept on the couch. Fast forward a couple of days and I'm in my bed, daytime, when I hear similar footsteps. I get up and check this time, cause you know, daytime, and I see this little bird hopping around. It hops so rhythmically timed that it sounds like footsteps. I used to camp in the UP at a state park. It was definitely rustic, and I just hiked with a tent and made my site in the middle of nowhere. When I first hiked out, I saw a bear where I started to set up camp. Decided it was best to move somewhere else and found a spot a few miles away. That night, I heard walking around my campsite. I'm by myself and I'm worried it's the bear or another bear. I just sat quietly for a while and just waited, hoping it would get bored, but I hear it walking around still. The steps were heavy sounding and I didn't want to be attacked. Finally, I get up and slowly open the zipper window. Then, I was scared of it. The squirrel sounded like a half-ton bear. Damn squirrel. Story 3. 10 years ago, I went camping for a weekend, went out hiking the morning of the second day, and pretty soon found ourselves off trail on a pretty steep incline along the Monashee River. We were about 100 feet up the incline. Suddenly, one of my friends lost his footing and started to slide. On the way down, he took out my other friend and I watched them hit every rock and tree on the way down to the rapids. I climbed down to find my one friend dead on the side of the river, and the other taken away by the river. His body was found 2 weeks later, 2 kilometers from where they fell. His body, or whatever is left of it, is still in the river because when search and rescue tried to remove it from the logjam, it was stuck in. The boulders on the riverbank came loose and collapsed on top of his corpse. This was a very abbreviated version of the story, but overall a very scary day. That's just tragic. I can't imagine how that must have felt. Story 4. I was pretty young and went camping with my dad in Alabama. It's late at night. The embers of the fire are dying down, and we're about to go to sleep when we hear what I can only describe as a bone-chilling moan in the woods. We looked at each other and decided it was trees rubbing together, but then it happened 2 more times. My dad grabbed the flashlight and I walked behind him with a big stick, determined I would save him if something went wrong. Eventually, we discovered a woman lying on the ground, not far from our campsite. She was on a hill with her head facing down, feet uphill, continuing to moan. Turns out she had so much to drink that she could hardly talk, but she was also camping out in these woods with her boyfriend. They had a big fight and he drove away, leaving her alone in the forest. She had seen our fire dying and wanted to give us the rest of her firewood before she left too, but had tripped and was too drunk to get up. We got her back to her campsite and made sure she wasn't driving anywhere that night. I'll never forget that moaning sound though. Weird you mentioned that moan. Drunken domestic issues are the worst. I took my toddler backpacking and we ended up camping near a trailhead because it was the best site. A party started up around 11 p.m. a few hundred feet from us, and at 1 to 2 a.m. it turned into just a man and a woman yelling at each other. Lots of smashing and banging and angry sounds. Eventually she took off in a car and he was guttural screaming and smashing things in the woods as I tried to keep my 3-year-old asleep. I texted 911 who said they would send someone and ghosted me. We woke up and ate breakfast and I tried to keep the 3-year-old quiet. We booked it for the car and there was a single tent set up in the parking lot and we peeled out of there. The moaning, screaming, smashing was so unsettling and unbearable. Camping with my SO at a tent campground where all the sites are all in a fairly open area situated close to each other. A youngish couple was right next to us, and then the 4 next closest sites by a group of sisters/sisters-in-law and their elementary-age daughters on a learn about camping and hiking weekend. In most campgrounds, all the loud noises end around 10 p.m. or so. The young couple next to us had been playing terrible country death metal music and were relieved when they turned it off and went into their tent, and then the moaning started. My SO looked at me and said, "Bet the moms weren't expecting to have to explain about the birds and the bees this weekend. Country death metal? I'm gonna be busy on Spotify for hours now." Story 5. Camping in the Serengeti with Masabi tribe men as guards, sitting around the fire when suddenly the Masi looks out into the pitch blackness, turns the flashlight on illuminating the eyes of a lion 40 yards out, just staring at us. I never heard a thing. Once at the zoo, I was walking past the back wall of the lion enclosure. Bamboo screened the fences on that side. The lions were roaring over something and I swear to God every hair on my body stood on end. It was creepy as hell. And that was in broad daylight at the zoo, for crying out loud. Lions in the darkness on the Serengeti would have definitely had my brain telling me to get into the car. Similar story, I was woken up by a hyena howl that sounded really nearby when I realized I really had to pee. I laid awake for another half hour before I mustered up the courage to step outside. I had a flashlight in one hand and the other controlling flow, which I'd pinch off every couple of seconds to listen for anything close. Scariest piss ever. Came here to tell my Africa camping story too. This was around 2008, forget the exact year, when there were a lot of political tensions in Kenya after an alleged rigged election. It was just myself and my sister, early 20s females, and our guide and cook. No fellow travelers, as everyone else canceled trips due to the unrest. Not exaggerating, there was not a single traveler on the entire trip, other than a stop in Nairobi. So here we are, 2 young women in a foreign country in the middle of major turmoil, in the pitch black of night in the African bush, with 2 men we had never met. So I had that anxiety, because of the implications of course. On top of that, I was puking my brains out from the malaria pill, and then I hear it. The laughing hyenas. I had no idea they would sound like that. It felt like a bad acid trip in a horror movie. Were they miles away? Were they right behind me? The sound was all around and it was straight up a laugh. I honestly have no idea what I was thinking of planning a trip like that, even under normal circumstances. I'm kind of a diva, but boy was I not prepared for that hot flash of adrenaline pumping the entire night, thinking they were going to tear through my tent any moment. Thank God for Ambien. Story 6. Thought our tent was being attacked by 3 bears. Turns out someone's dogs just got loose, and the light outside made them look gigantic. A similar thing happened to me. We hear sounds of things getting torn apart, digging, crunching, etc. Huge shadow across the tent. Sounds of another animal ripping something apart in the opposite direction. We cautiously opened the tent windows to reveal squirrels. They were digging around in our firewood and tearing apart our paper kindling. We used to have a pop-up tent trailer with a fiberglass roof. One very early morning, we were woken by what we thought was the devil and a band of demons screeching and clawing at the roof of our trailer. Turns out it was a bunch of seagulls fighting over what I found out was a hot dog bun one of the kids tossed up there before we went to bed. Between me yelling, my wife screaming, the kids crying, and the seagulls squawking, I'm pretty sure the whole campground was woken up before we figured out what was going on. We were camped at Yellowstone in a hard-sided campers-only campground, with signs everywhere warning you to make lots of noise when walking to the bathroom and back because of bears. Our 120-pound solid black Great Dane was with us. The next site had a huge family of about 20 people all gathered around a few picnic tables. After dinner, it was dark by then, I forgot to tie our pooch up and he wandered over to the next campsite to say hi. When nobody acknowledged his overtures of friendship, he started barking. The chaos that ensued was epic. People ran away screaming and one guy went over backwards in his chair. I'll never forget that one woman who was frozen stiff in the firelight, holding a large salad spoon out in front of her like it would fend off the bear. I felt kind of bad, but honestly from my point of view it was kind of hilarious. Story 7. Used to camp at this fairly secluded spot on state land. It has been since discovered and become popular, unfortunately. I've been going to that site since I was a kid, and it had become an annual tradition for my buddies and me to kind of unplug and rough it for a few days. However, at the time, a little over 15 years ago now, it was relatively unknown and it was a bit of a trek to get to the campsite. Middle of the woods, but close to a lake, perfect for swimming. We're talking no cell signal and no light pollution. You're just out in the wilderness. My buddies and I were geeked to get out there and spend the week camping every summer. One summer afternoon, I'm the first to arrive, ready for a week of camping, drinking, and swimming. However, to my dismay, I discovered that the site already has an established campsite going. There are a couple of tents set up. Granted, it's a fairly large campsite, so I decided to haul my gear over and see if I can talk to the other campers into letting us share the spot. Who knows, they might be cool and maybe it'll be one big party. I come up to the site and there are no people. The tents are empty. There was evidence of a campfire, so I know there were people here not too long ago. I decided to check the lake. Maybe they went swimming. There's a steep path that leads from the site to the lake, and as I'm walking alongside it, I discover some debris has blown down along the path. There's a sleeping bag, some tools, and some clothes that had been on a line, but now they're all in the dirt. All evidence that this site has actually been set up for a while. The clothes are wet with ditch water. They've been sitting on the ground in the path for some time. There are no people at the lake, and when I returned to the site upon further investigation, I discovered that this site has been abandoned for some time. But that doesn't explain why they just left everything behind. From what I could tell, the people camping here had left in a big hurry. There's clothes, there's food and other gear. I mean, it's an entire camp. The tents were fairly new. I mean, it's not just stuff that you leave behind unless you're scrambling and only grabbing the essentials. What was weird to me was that the fire was out, but there was still ice in their coolers and beers, so it couldn't have been too long ago that they were there. My other buddies arrive and we decide to set up camp nearby and keep an eye on it. Maybe the people had to leave for an emergency or something. We wind up camping out the whole week, and no evidence of people coming back to retrieve their stuff. Luckily, the DNR happened to stop by on patrol, and we filled them in on our discovery. They let us know they'd been packing up the stuff and taking it into a lost and found up at their station. Kinda creepy, mostly weird. Who knows what happened to those people? I have a friend who had a job cleaning up after one of those huge outdoor traveling music festivals. Her first time, she was freaked out by all the abandoned tents, sleeping bags, camping gear, etc. But it turns out it's a regular occurrence. People literally bought high-end camping gear and just ditched them when the festival was over. She and her buddies made a small fortune selling barely used gear, talking North Face, Mountain Hardwear tents, sleeping bags, etc. Story 8. Sheer terror when I was a kid at Boy Scout summer camp. One kid left a couple of airheads out on the picnic table. Everyone woke up in the middle of the night too. No joke, 30 plus raccoons were fighting over airheads and going into tents looking for more food. If you've never heard that many hissing and growling raccoons at the same time, good for you. Raccoons are absolutely nuts, super cute and curious until snacks are involved. I used to care for about 70 for the local wildlife rescue. They were juveniles being raised for release. The first time I didn't realize I would be locked in alone with 70 raccoons, with just a hose that they thought was the most interesting stuff ever to defend myself. Once I learned to keep my key under my foot in my boot, things got better, lol. They wanted that key really bad and would lose all fear of humans to get it. They would stand above me and take my ponytail out so that they could get the hair tie. I'd have a million tiny hands in my pockets and in my boots digging around for whatever was in there. They can't help themselves. They gotta touch everything. Super cute and friendly while I was cleaning, but I learned real quick to fill their food buckets super fast and bolt. Last year, after my wife and I got married, we took a week off with no plans and decided we would do whatever we thought spur of the moment. One night we decided to go to the movies and see A Quiet Place Part 2, and the next day we decided to drive across the state for a one-night camping trip. She can be a bit jumpy, and sitting around the campfire after watching a horror movie the night before had her on edge. We go to bed, and before we fall asleep we hear the most awful of growls and hisses coming from right outside the tent. The terror she experienced after being on edge all night had her freaking out and unable to sleep. I've tried to tell this story to people, but it's impossible to describe just how creepy and aggressive those noises are. Story 9. When my current wife started dating, we went out camping in the fall. Leaves were down, kinda chilly, very romantic. In the middle of the night, we heard what we assumed was a two-legged creature near our car. Being the man I was, I got the boots on and I was headed out. Wife, girlfriend, hands me this crappy little pocket knife. As soon as I undo the zipper, I hear footsteps running away. I'm all manly, so I go check anyway. Upon returning to the tent, I'm faced with a .380 handgun pointed at me. That was pretty scary. She sent me into the forest with a pocket knife. Didn't want me to know she had a gun, so it wasn't weird. Good job marrying that one. My current partner and I, years ago, were sitting out on the ground level patio. Nice place, but right downtown, so you get lots of sketchy folks walking by, but mostly just harmless, looking to bum a cigarette, that kind of thing. One time this guy comes by extremely tweaked and starts getting super aggressive. My partner kinda leans away and holds her wine glass away from the guy while I'm trying to de-escalate. Anyway, dude eventually leaves and I laugh. Haha, you were worried he was gonna swipe your wine. And she goes, no, I was getting ready to smash the glass in case I needed a weapon. What a keeper. My friend got jumped by 5 other guys in college and we were all super worried about him after. He was a big dude and got jumped by like rival frat dudes, not like gangsters or anything, so he was mostly just bruised up. He's explaining this to us while showing us a nasty bruise on the side of his torso, saying that's the only part that's really bothering him. It's in a weird shape though, so we're all looking at it trying to figure out what happened. It didn't look like a punch or a kick. He was on a date when he got jumped, and she jumped in to help by just going crazy and doing whatever she could, throwing punches, kicks, scratches, and bites every which way she could. In the chaos, she didn't know who she was attacking and she accidentally bit him. And this was one of their first dates, so we were all like, damn, she was out for blood. She's a keeper. This reminds me of an event soon after moving into our house. We were still holed up in one room adjacent to the kitchen while we remodeled the rest of the house. One night, we woke up to hear a noise from the kitchen, a pause, and then a bunch of banging pots and pans. My wife, girlfriend at the time, hands me a broom and pushes me into the dark kitchen. The light switch was on the far wall, of course, while she gets her handgun out and loads it. Turns out it was a possum that had come in through the open dryer vent. Story 10. Pretty sure 2 guys were going to RAPE my friend and me. We were teenagers, 16 and 18, and went up alone. We made dinner and were having a good time in the evening when some guy passed by our site in the river. He had a fishing pole, so we were like, whatever. He asked to go through our site to the road, and we figured it was harmless enough and said yeah. He stopped and looked around our site and started asking us questions. How old are you? Where are you from? How long are you staying? Typical questions that were none of his business, but we were naive enough to answer. He eventually leaves and heads down the canyon on the road. A couple of hours later, he shows back up with a buddy. Both of these guys are middle-aged, probably mid-40s. They start asking more questions. The original guy walks around and snoops about our campsite. We got an uneasy feeling and we were super grateful when they eventually left, but they went up the canyon, rather than back where they came from. Another couple of hours pass and it's dark. My friend mentions how she can't hear anything because of the river and it makes her a bit antsy. We talked, and it turned out we both had been on the edge since the guys left. We had never seen them go back down the canyon. We both had a gut feeling that we needed to leave and fast. Maybe nothing would have happened, but we both felt it. Those guys asked all the right questions to know that we would be there alone and defenseless all that night. While preparing for a solo backcountry backpacking trip, I, male, read that some women bring an extra outdoor chair while solo camping. At a glance, it looks like there are more people, and it's more convincing to say your boyfriend is fishing or hiking for a couple of hours if there's an empty chair. I'm sure your guts were right. I had a similar experience of sharing a strong gut feeling with someone, and it ended up being for a good reason. When me and my friend were around 14, we were walking alone late at night, as we often did being stupid teenagers, and some man was riding his bike past us. He said hi to us, and we said hi back, and we all continued on our way. He went ahead of us, turned onto a different road, and then was out of sight. Then, just a couple of minutes later, he silently and slowly rode past us again. Me and my friend both had the same unspoken feeling of dread, and we just silently bolted at the exact same moment, cutting through yards in order to lose him. That was pretty out of the ordinary for us. We were normally pretty fearless and naive, and had dealt with our fair share of creeps, much more apparently creepy than a guy silently riding his bike. The next day, we learned that the same guy was arrested later that same night for stalking a minor and trying to break into her home after following her there, and was also already a registered sex offender. I have no idea what would have happened if we continued walking at a normal pace in the same vicinity as this guy, if anything, but he gave us both the same feeling of dread and needing to get the hell away from him as fast as possible, without even needing to say a word to each other. It's just so crazy to experience the same intuitive feeling with another person at the same exact moment, and both act on it without question. Gut feeling may not always be correct, but it's better to be safe than sorry. Story 11. Oh, you've come to the right place. About 20 years ago, I was camping in a hammock for the first time. I didn't have a rain tarp yet, leaving myself completely uncovered save for a sleeping bag. Now this was a trip from a summer camp in the area, so there were about 6 other teens with me. One kid decided, "Hey, chocolate, that's not a smellable, right?" and left the chocolate in his pack right next to mine, under the hammock. You may see where this is going. Lo and behold, around 12, a juvenile black bear moseys his way onto our campsite looking for that sweet, sweet chocolate. As he was messing with our packs underneath the hammock, his back kept bumping into me. I was starting to wake up, but I was very groggy. I kinda thought it was the kid looking for something in his pack. The bear realizes that the hammock is moving and gives it a bat with his paw, like a cat with yarn, swinging me. At this point, I realized this is not a camper and start screaming. The rest of the campsite woke up and we threw rocks at the bear until it ran away. The kid got a severe punishment. I would love to hear this story from the bear's perspective. "So I was just walking around, minding my own business, eating a snack I found, playing with this weird branch. Then the branch started making a howling noise and a bunch of hairless apes jumped out of nowhere and started throwing rocks at me. No idea what I encountered that day, but it was some bizarre satanic stuff for sure." Story 12. Late at night, camping in the desert, I heard footsteps all around our tents. Thought it was maybe some drunk guy from one of the nearby camps who was riding dirt bikes and stuff all day. Couldn't see anyone. Couldn't see any shadows. Kept hearing the footsteps, literally inches from our tent. Woke up my friend silently and made him listen too. We were freaking out. Finally, they went away, so I slowly opened my tent zipper to look around and see who or what it was. Threw out a glow stick and saw some eyes flash in the darkness. Turns out it was 2 white desert foxes, whose footsteps were somehow extremely heavy sounding. When I saw them, they were on our camp table eating all of our chocolate. Oops. All of the chocolate? F that. This is the true horror right there. Story 13. Once in the wilderness, me and a couple of other guys, drunk as we were, started howling at the moon only to inadvertently attract real wolves. They showed up at our campsite about 1.5 hours later when we were in our hammocks getting ready to sleep. No harm done. They sniffed around for a couple of minutes and then went off. Guess they were disappointed in what they found and luckily not desperately hungry. Anyway, I was very scared and tried to remain completely still and silent during this brief encounter. Wolves don't often care for humans as food, and they barely ever attack. And it's not usually out of hunger. They're pretty chill creatures, and they act a lot like dogs at heart. They go for big game, like elk, deer, and caribou. They can go for a really long time without eating, and they eat a lot in one sitting when they can. It's called a feast or famine diet. Humans put in a lot of effort for very little actual meat, so they don't really care for us. Story 14. When I was a kid, probably around 11 to 13, my best friend's grandparents lived on a farm, maybe 100 acres of forest with a few clearings and a house, that we used to camp out in all the time. One night, a few of us were camping and we heard repeated thumps and screaming from the trees. We had literally just finished reading a book about Bigfoot in school and were positive that Bigfoot was out in the woods hitting trees and roaring. We got out of the tent, terrified, and walked through the woods towards the noise. Note, I guess people really do this kind of dumb thing. It's not just in horror movies. We eventually came to a clearing and found several of my friend's uncles trying to fix an old barn, while they were absolutely shit-faced, at like 2 in the morning. The thumps were the sound of them hitting wood with hammers. The screams were when they missed and hit themselves because of the alcohol. We were terrified, but now it's hilarious. Not a scary story, but my brother once let me watch a scary Bigfoot movie when I was far too young, which led to me having a terrifying fear/fascination with all things Bigfoot for the rest of my life. The one time I went to a sleepaway Girl Scout camp, I guess the camp asked if your kid had any particular fears they should be aware of, and my mother told the camp counselors that I was terrified of Bigfoot. I only found out she did this when I was an adult, but as far as I remember, I never gave Bigfoot a thought that whole week because I was otherwise convinced that he lived behind the furnace in our basement. Story 15. I was tent camping in Arkansas around 2003 to 2004, and the Blair Witch Project was still fresh on my mind. I was about 20 years old at the time. Around 2 or 3 in the morning, we were woken up by what sounded like a small child running around our tent, crying and trying to get in. I was thoroughly freaked out. Finally, I decided to open the tent, and there was a kid that couldn't have been more than 3 years old, scared half to death, and only wearing a diaper. I had lots of thoughts going through my head, but mostly, how the hell do I handle this? I can't really go from campsite to campsite. The ranger office is closed and I'm standing there in the middle of the night holding a child that isn't mine. We had decided to call the cops, figuring it was the safest thing to do. Just then, a lady walks down the trail and is like, "How did you get out?" The kid was saying, "Mama, Mama," and went straight to her. She nonchalantly said thank you and walked away. Now, as a parent, I can't imagine how much more that would freak me out if it were my kid. A similar thing happened to me. No joke, the Blair Witch Project had been out for maybe 2 years. I was camping on the trail out at Smuggler's Notch out in Vermont. Just me and my 2 cousins. We go to bed for the night and we start hearing children giggling maybe 30 feet away. There in the dark, we all heard the pitter-patter of footsteps that kept getting closer and closer. All the while, you could hear the stifled giggling of children. About 10 feet from the tent, it all goes silent, and that's when the crying and screaming and laughing all start. I was absolutely terrified, but my youngest cousin and I basically resolved to rush out at whatever was out there. Turns out it was 4 kids that were going around the campsite to campsite and messing with people. We ran them off and in the morning went down to complain to the rangers. Got a free comp stay out of it as a result, so all's well that ends well. But thank God I didn't go to bed that night needing to pee. Good God. People today who have grown up in a culture saturated with viral videos and marketing will never be able to truly understand how much of an impact the Blair Witch Project had. No one had done something like that before, and it captivated everyone. I knew people who wouldn't even walk to their cars after the movie got out. The movie itself is flawed for sure, but the scope isn't only about the film. They pretty much invented the found footage genre and viral marketing with next to nothing but an independent movie. Thanks for watching until the end. If you have a similar story to these that you'd like to share with us, please leave it in the comments below. If you enjoyed this video, please leave us a like and subscribe. For more videos like this one right now, please stop by our channel. Thanks again, and see you next time.